The Muslim world is not your backyard.
Extremism with an Australian accent. Tonight on Insight, the summit we had to have. Australia's Muslims speak out. Hello and welcome to Insight. I'm Jenny Brocky. It's great to be back. Last week, John Howard heard from some Australian Muslims at a summit in Canberra. But other prominent Muslims with radical opinions weren't invited to the meeting. Tonight, radical voices join moderates and the Attorney-General in our studio. There are some notable absentees. Sheikh Omran, a controversial cleric from Melbourne, declined our invitation to debate his fellow Muslim Australians. But Sheikh Omran's views are on the record. On this program, he was asked what he told his followers to think about Osama bin Laden. This was his answer.
Again, this is a complex matter. We talk about a person who sacrificed himself, his wealth, his family, for something he believes is absolutely true. And in that regard, I find him a very great man.
Who is responsible for September 11?
I don't want to say USA government, but I would say some of them, they are responsible for that.
The government is responsible?
Yes. Yes, I believe in that, 100%. I believe there is, what they call it, a conspiracy against Islam and Muslims.
Is it a good Muslim's duty to go and fight the coalition forces for jihad in Iraq at the moment?
I would say yes.
Well, Adam Somyurek, you're a Muslim and you're a Victorian MP, and you've said recently we have the same types of people in Melbourne as those polarising London. Do you mean people like Sheikh Omran?
Can I just say to you, Jenny, I entered Parliament in November 2002, not as a Muslim MP, but as a MP, as a candidate representing the values of my party, the ALP, and ultimately I am in Parliament to represent my constituents. Now, I entered this debate...
But the question I'm asking is, when you talk about extremism, is that what you're talking about?
It is, absolutely it is. Now, I entered this discussion only after the London bombings. Prior to that, I did not want to give a running commentary on Muslim issues. Now, after the London bombings, people such as the gentleman just seen there, and by the way, I congratulate him for keeping a low profile too.
So you're glad he's not here tonight?
Well, I'm happy that he is keeping a low profile, so that's sensible, actually. That's to be congratulated.
Well, he hasn't kept a low profile. He's had quite a high profile.
I think he has for the last month or so. I think he has for the last month.
And he's a prominent Muslim leader in Melbourne, and presumably he has a fair amount of influence over young people. Is that dangerous, do you think, someone like that to be influencing young people?
I would say his influence is overstated. But certainly he has been getting the headlines. Now, I was frustrated at that, and I was also frustrated at the inability of mainstream Muslim leaders to nail a simple anti-terror message. Look, Muslim leaders have condemned terrorism, and they've done it often. But the problem is when you get leaders that want to sort of go off on a tangent and, for example, talk about go off on a diatribe about a long...
Well, saying the US is responsible for September 11th.
Exactly, a long and sort of convoluted diatribe about American imperial foreign policy objectives and practices in the Middle East and the rest of the world. Now, this is not nailing a message. This is going off on a tangent.
OK, Nasha, well, what about you? You're from Melbourne. How do you feel about Sheikh Omran speaking for Muslim Australians sometimes, or that being the impression that people out in the community have, that he somehow represents
Unfortunately,
Muslim opinion?
people who are outside the community it's really difficult to understand how Byzantine and how complex views within the Muslim community are. And when you're looking at it through the prism of person A or person B, it's easy to take that view as representative of the whole community.
Are you worried by views like that?
I'm more worried about how people will react to those views, both Muslims and non-Muslims.
And what do you mean by that, how they'll react?
I'm worried about, you know, my mother walking down the street with nobody with her and getting attacked. I'm worried about people's reactions to those views in terms of, you know, what my little brother has to face in his classes. That's what I'm worried about.
But aside from the discrimination, are you worried about those views at a more political level, at the level of somebody preaching that kind of thing?
I think perhaps you're underestimating the intelligence of the average Australian viewer. So, you know, you've got to bear in mind that the audience isn't a passive one.
Okay.
And, yeah.
Fair enough. Karanda, yes.
Yeah, I think the fundamental cornerstone of Australian society is freedom of speech, freedom of expression. He has the right to express himself in any which way he wants, as long as I believe the line is drawn when he's inciting any form of violence. If he doesn't do that, then he has a right to express himself, and I think that's the beauty of Australian society. We can have a healthy debate.
So, Karanda, do you have a problem with him saying that as a...
Personally, I have a problem with him because of what Nasir said. It's the reaction that the mainstream society has, thinking that all Muslims are like him. He's a minority, and he doesn't represent most Muslims. In actual fact, he's probably less than 1% of the Muslim community in Australia.
I think what's most disconcerting, of course, is that the Australian public is being told that we should be greatly concerned about words that are spoken, whereas in reality that there are Muslims dying in their hundreds of thousands in the Muslim world that are directly responsible and carried out by the hands of this government.
Well, even accepting that Muslims are dying, I wonder, I'd like to ask you, Wasim, because you're a local spokesman for Hizb ut-Tahrir. Now, it's an organisation that's about to be banned in Britain after the London bombings. And I'm interested in that context, in what you think about Osama bin Laden. And I'd like a clear answer from you about what you think about Osama bin Laden. Is he a great man? Do you support what he and Al-Qaeda are doing?
Well, the very clear answer to that is that the issue is bigger than Osama bin Laden. What is most important is that irrespective of the identity of the perpetrators, 9/11 or Madrid or London, the reality is that Western governments have used these events...
That's not a clear answer to my question. I'm sorry. It's not a clear answer to my question. My question is really simple. It's a really simple question. It's a really, really simple question.
Well, the answer is even more simpler. The reality is...
Do you condemn... No, I'd like to ask you the question. Do you condemn the actions of Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda? Yes or no?
I can go even further than that. I will state unequivocally, and this is where I challenge the government and everyone else, I will state unequivocally that I will condemn the killing of any non-combatant innocent civilians, whether in Australia or whether in Iraq. Now, will the government do the same?
All right, so you're saying you don't support Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden?
I don't support at all, and no Muslim supports, no one has gone on the record to say that they will justify the killing of innocent civilians. The reality is that we are being told we should be concerned about words that are spoken, whereas in reality, bombs are being dropped by B-52s.
Okay, Sheikh Yasin, you're a visiting lecturer from the United States. What do you think of Osama bin Laden?
I think that it's wrong for you and anyone else to personalize this issue with Osama bin Laden. I am as a visiting lecturer to this country, I am as a visitor to any other country and an American, I am enraged that people keep personalizing an issue with individuals. I do not support the suicide bombers or genocide bombers, wholesale terror or retail terror, the terror of individuals or the terror of states. And I think, again, I'd like to reiterate what my constituent over here said, that you're personalizing the issue, and that is not the whole issue. We need to look at the spectrum of the issue. It is not a baseball team.
To be fair, I don't think I'm personalizing the issue.
Well,
I mean, I'm bouncing off what someone else has said here.
Well,
it's not that I've raised.
I'm bouncing directly off of you. You're coordinating this discussion.
So you're saying you don't support.
Well, I think I've said for the record my answer to what you have just said, and I don't think that we should personalize the issue. We're living under a spectrum of terror. And if you tear that spectrum in half and make a straight line, there are two ends of it. We need to work about both ends, those who provoke it and those that react to the provocations.
Yes. Amjad.
Jenny, I think, I mean, we have made this point very clear before, that it's about time that the Muslims owned up to some of the things that are happening. And it's a wrong message that we are sending to our community, to our youth, when we keep on saying that Osama bin Laden is a great man, or that we are not prepared to say that what he did was wrong. It's about time we did that. It's very important that we should put the card on the table.
So do you think there's too much obfuscating going on, Amjad? Do you think people are not being direct enough in saying that?
Absolutely.
In the Muslim community?
Absolutely. And I think we need to put this matter straight on the table. What has gone on has had an involvement of Muslims around the world, and it's about time we acknowledge that and we move on from there to deal with it.
Adam, you were agreeing?
Look, I think to talk about Iraq, September 11 happened before Iraq, so Iraq cannot justify acts of terror, I think. Look, there are competing images of Islam at the moment. One image is this gentleman there staring at us with a Kalashnikov, and the other image is of a peaceful Muslim overwhelming majority population. And the challenge for the Muslims today is to make sure that the dominant images of Islam in Australia are those of peace.
Philip Ruddock, I'd like to bring you in at this point. Now, Wassim Durehi's group is about to be banned in Britain. He's sitting here, and today you've expressed concern about Hizb ut-Tahrir, the group that he's involved in. You've said that it, I think, gives succour and counsel, were the terms that you used, to terrorism, or to the things that we've been talking about. What are you going to do about that? I mean, are you planning to ban this group, to ban the group that this young man is a member of?
Well, I'd like to make one statement first, and that is that the government certainly does not counsel the killing of innocent civilians. And when civilians are deliberately targeted for death by terrorists, that is a very different set of circumstances to somebody who may be, unfortunately, and I use that term very deliberately, the subject of collateral activity where they've not been targeted at all. Okay,
I'm not going to get. We're not going to get into a debate about Iraq here, because that's not why we're here. So I'd like to move on to the question I asked you, which was about Wassim's group and the banning of Wassim's group. Now, why are you expressing an interest in possibly banning this group, in following what they've done in Britain?
Well,
what is it that worries you about the group?
Hizb ut-Tahrir has been the subject of prescription in a number of countries through Central Asia, in Eastern Europe, and in Germany.
And what is it about that group that worries you?
Well, I've indicated that they have been the subject of prescription in a number of countries, and Britain has now announced that it is doing so. I asked our agencies here whether under the criminal code it could be prescribed, and
you found that it couldn't.
Well, the test that is outlined in the legislation is that you can only ban or prescribe an organisation where it has planned, prepared, or fostered. And fostered is governed by the earlier words that are used, and the legal advice is that even though it may give succour and encouragement to terrorist activity, that would not bring it within the specific provisions of the criminal code.
How do you think it gives succour and encouragement to terrorist activities?
Well, the point I made very deliberately was that the legislation does not cover that sort of activity. So if you have an organisation, and I wasn't suggesting in relation to Hizb ut-Tahrir as I'd formed a view about it at all, because if a decision is to be made, if the law is changed, it's got to be made objectively and on the facts.
It sounds like that's the way you're headed, though, yes?
No, it's a question that we will be looking at in the context of a review of the legislation that we're undertaking.
Quick response from you,
that very quickly. Let me put it in context, and this is when we want to talk about terrorism, we can't localise the issue just in Australia. It's a global phenomenon, and it has developed as a consequence of events. First of all, let's be realistic, and every Australian should know that the Western world has occupied the Islamic world for over a century, has destroyed its straits, divided lands, appointed tyrant rules over it, stolen the resources, impoverished the people. Now, the reality is that the Muslims are trying to free themselves from the shackles of Western imperialism. Now, the problem is Western governments, and not only are they just not prepared to accept the price that comes with the colonisation...
So the price is suicide bombing?
The reality is they're not even prepared to accept criticism of their foreign policy. And that's the reality when you start talking about banning Hizb ut-Tahrir, which the world over knows is a non-violent organisation that purely deals with intellectual and political means. The reality is a message that is sent to the Muslim community is that this government, as with all Western governments, are no longer prepared to accept any criticism of its foreign policy.
Nasha, you want to say something?
I'd also like to add that there's a real danger in narrowing the framework of the discussion to how many Muslims condemn Osama bin Laden. If we're serious about clamping down on extremism, we've really got to move away from this decontextualising of terrorism and insisting that the framework of the discussion be, do the Muslims in Australia condemn Osama bin Laden or not? If we were to get every single Muslim in Australia to sign a letter saying we do not like Osama bin Laden, I don't see how that is really going to deal with the roots of terrorism. I don't see how that's going to...
I think what people want to know is how big is the danger, the threat of extremism. The average person wants to know whether a suicide bombing is likely to happen in Australia, and if so, where it's going to come from and how it's going to eventuate.
Perhaps the paradigm of the discussion then should move beyond who is, who's extremist, who's moderate, with these very sort of divisive labels.
Extremism is on both sides.
Sorry, up the back, yes.
I mean, we're both... This extremism's not just coming from the Muslim community. Yeah. If we view it in a negative context, we're perpetrators of extremism as well. I mean, this is a human problem. This isn't just about Muslims or about Western society. This is for all of us to consider.
Yes, Irfan, yes.
Candidate. It's a bit rich for the government to start lecturing people about extremism when Philip Ruddock knows that in his own conference there are extremist young Liberals who are stacking out his branches. We've already had one scalp last night. There was John Brogdon.
Yeah, but they're not bombing people, are they?
Not yet. No, but if you read some of the speeches that I've read in Hansard in the New South Wales Upper House, if you read some of the things, some of the rhetoric that's coming out from Liberal MPs, okay, they're not killing people, but it's still extreme. Is it not extreme?
Okay, we'll move on from the Liberal Party. I think a couple more comments. Down the front, yes.
In terms of a terrorist attack in Australia, I think it's probably inevitable. We've had them before. The Hilton bombing was one, and there have been some embassies attacked. Now, it's probably going to happen, and it may come from someone with an affiliation to Islam. But the thing that you have to remember is that it's not just going to be the non-Muslims that are the victims. The Muslims are going to be the victims as well. Just about every terrorist attack that has happened in the West has had Muslim casualties. We're all targets. And at the moment, this talk about us being the enemy is the big danger. Muslims need to be inside the tent fighting against the terrorists that are targeting Australia.
Exactly what I mean when I talk about Liberal MPs, backbenchers, demonising their constituents, and talking about,
What are you referring to? Banning headscarves?
I'm talking about... what does a cloth on a woman's head have to do with suicide bombing or dropping bombs or blowing people up? It is totally irrelevant when you have backbenchers and when you have the young Liberal president, the future leaders of the party, talking about these sorts of things and talking about extremist rhetoric. It's like when the government talks about Muslims, it's like people in glass houses throwing stones.
Okay. Adam, you wanted to say something about Hizb ut-Tahrir, which we were talking about before. Do you think it should be banned as an organisation in Australia?
Can I just say what Wasim said before sounds to the average Australian out there listening. What he said sounds like justification or rationalisation of killing, of mass murder, essentially. Australians don't want to hear that. They want to hear a clear, unequivocal message.
It's not justification of mass murder. Now,
well, that's what it sounds like. I don't disagree with a lot of what Wasim and his organisation say, but I've never heard them justify killing anybody. They have a message, and it's a message that comes out from people like the Young Socialists at university and a whole range of others. You're going to have to ban a whole lot of other people if you ban him.
Yeah, Sheikh Yasin, yeah.
Let me say something. I think that as students of history, we forget. This whole new definition of terrorism is about 8 or 10 years old. The new definition. But there's an old definition. Look to Thorndike, Webster. Look to Funk and Wagnall. Look to their definition of terrorism. And I give you 14 countries that right now are the G9 who themselves have perpetrated and fell within the categorization and the very clear definition of terrorism. And I'll tell you what it cost over the period of the last 150 years. It cost 37 million lives. So I ask you, with this new definition of terrorism that we keep on talking about, okay, how many lives have it cost? We need to discuss the whole spectrum of terror. What is the definition of terror? Who participated in it? Even if we're wearing suits now, even if we have constitutions now, did we perform it? And I asked Mr. Ruddock, let me just finish one thing. Mr. Ruddock, he knows that in this country, there is no statute of limitations on murder. If you murdered somebody 200 years ago, you're still a murderer today. So I say that all the people who murdered people all over the world 200 years ago, they're still murderers. And that was the spectrum of provocation I'm talking about.
Sheikh Yasin, I'd like at this point to just go to a few things that you've said since you've been in Australia. You're visiting Australia at the moment. Some of the things that you've said that people at home may not have seen. Let's have a look at those.
There's no such thing as a Muslim having a non-Muslim friend. So a non-Muslim could be your associate, but they can't be a friend. The punishment for homosexuality or bestiality or anything like that is death. We don't make any excuses about that. It's not our law. It's the Quran.
Do you stand by those comments?
Well,
the punishment for homosexuality is death?
Let me say, first of all, that's what you call a soundbite. Now, everybody here knows that the soundbite is not actually what a person said. Just a moment, my friend. Just a moment, my friend. This was directed at myself, so just hold up for a minute. Let me qualify my statement, if you will, okay? Excuse me, let me qualify my statement, she asked me. You'll get a chance to jump into this circus, all right? Just a minute. First of all, what I meant, in Islam, there are two kinds of friendship, Qanuni and Shari, which means that we have the right to have Muslim friends who are intimate with us. For instance, Mr. Ruddock here could be my closest of friend, but he couldn't marry my daughter, and I couldn't marry his daughter, maybe. You see, that's a different kind of friendship. In Islam, Shari'i friendship means one that is based upon Islam. The other kind of friendship is Qanuni, which we have associates, we have colleagues, we have co-workers who are our friends. But
and the punishment for homosexuality is death?
No, I said in Islam. And also in the Bible for those who are Christians. The punishment for homosexuality and bestiality is death. But we are not living under an Islamic governmental apparatus, and therefore I did not promote or I did not say that this is what we should do today.
Okay.
That was a soundbite.
Sister Aziza, I'm interested in what you think about
Sheikh
this.
Yasin, with respect, this would give the wrong message to young people. I have a lot of Australian friends who share Islamic values with me. They are Australian values too. And when you look back to the way of the Prophet, and we know that he was the living Quran, and that we emulate him.
That's correct.
He used to go and knock on the door of his Jewish neighbor if he didn't see him for a few days, and find out if he's well, if he needed assistance.
You're correct, sister.
When Christian delegations came, he invited them to meet with him in the mosque.
That's correct, sister.
And when the time for prayer came, he allowed them to pray in the mosque.
That is correct, sister.
Could you just let her finish for a moment, please? Yes.
Why are we then stressing extreme lines like marriage that is, a personal decision anyway?
Can I answer her question?
We cannot really...
I'd like to hear some other opinions.
We cannot promote an attitude like that among the young people.
The Quran forbids us the Quran forbids that I give my daughter to a Christian.
We're not talking about the marriage. We're talking about friendship.
That's what I mentioned.
We're talking about friendship.
Okay, so Sister Aziza, when you hear those sorts of comments as an Australian Muslim, how do you feel about the fact that is the representation?
I feel very upset because I feel that young people on both sides, Muslims and non-Muslims, are getting the wrong message. Are getting the message that we cannot be friends with you, we cannot share anything with you. And that is not right.
And clearly there's criticism of the media in this, but is there also criticism of the community itself or members of the community for the way they're portraying?
Yes, because a lot of the women sometimes that I meet tell me, oh, my daughter is a friend of an Australian girl, I can't let her be like that. I said, why? Australians believe in family values, believe in morals, believe in a lot of things. Just check the family and find out if they are on the same level as yourself.
Gentleman up the back's had his hand up for a long time.
I'd just like to ask the Attorney General one question, and that is, as a simple seventh generation Australian, I have always felt that incitement to murder is a criminal offence. And I really wonder what is the problem. If these people are encouraging others to commit mass murder, why isn't the government doing something about it?
Well, I don't know that we've established that these people are doing that, but Philip Ruddock, quick response?
Well, look, I mean, all these matters depend upon the facts, and there may well be an offence. If the relevant evidence is there, then an offence is committed. I'm not going on a hypothetical situation to give a legal opinion.
We have incitement laws at the moment that cover this sort of thing. Why are you flagging the need for new laws to deal with some of these issues if we've already got incitement laws that do cover incitement to violence? Aren't they adequate?
Well, I think in relation to the way in which the law is operated and the advice that we have in relation to particular fact situations, it may well be necessary to extend the operation of the law to put beyond doubt what the Parliament might intend. But I'm not going to foreshadow provisions in matters where we haven't yet concluded our deliberations.
So you're foreshadowing something, but you're not telling us what it is.
Well, the Prime Minister made it very clear that in the light of the London bombings that we would look at what is being done abroad, see whether there are any lessons in relation to our domestic situation, and then in a considered way bring forward any amendments that might be necessary.
Julian Burnside, I know you've got strong views on this whole issue of speech. I mean, at what point does speech become dangerous?
Look, I'm troubled about the way this conversation is going. It's falling into the same trap as the public conversation at large. You pick out a couple of extreme views, and the assumption is that these are generally shared. And if Cardinal Pell got up and expressed an extreme view, I don't think the community at large would attribute those views to the entire Christian community in Australia.
One of the interesting things that's happened in the research for this program is that in talking to Muslim Australians, what we've found is that a lot of people are not happy with the leadership in the community, that is part of the seems to be part of the problem. Is that a fair comment? I mean, do people feel that the leadership isn't adequately responding
to the statement that he made here?
Well, no. The statement that he makes, I think, is a valid statement to make. But I think beyond that, there is also an issue of who are the people who are popping their heads up and making comments that are read as, by the broader population, representative of Muslim Australians. I mean, do you think that's a problem,
In the present climate, I can quite understand that moderate Muslims who think that they are being misrepresented by statements like this, might be a little hesitant to put their heads above the parapet. You know, it's not a great climate for that sort of free speech.
But I think there are people here who want to put their heads above the parapet. Karanda, you've been critical of leadership, haven't you?
Well, I think we've got to appreciate the fact that the Islamic community is not one homogenous group. There are so many different factions, there are so many different ethnicities, and so you will get people that call themselves leaders, and they will speak on behalf of their congregation, but they won't represent the mainstream. I know for a fact that no one in the Islamic community in Australia is inciting violence. No one is calling for any type of so-called jihad. What people here are saying is that they're unhappy with some of the things going on in Iraq or Palestine. They have a right to express those views, but they're not inciting violence. And I don't know any Muslims that have any values that are incompatible with the so-called Australian values that our Liberal government has been espousing. So I don't see what the problem is. I think that Australian Muslims are one of the most integrated Islamic communities living in the West. We've got to be proud of that fact and work with the community.
Dr. Nabil Ibrahim, you're a doctor. You've set up a group called Australian Muslim Doctors Against Violence, with 57 doctors, I think, who are members of that group. Now, what do you think about the way that the Muslim community has responded to the climate at the moment, in terms of leadership?
Let me tell you, the absolute single reason that we formed that group was the very obvious absence of leadership within the Muslim community. At a time when the Prime Minister was in London and he was crying out for people to do enough, and also we realized that there is a definite risk as doctors and the surgeons, and we realized that there is a definite risk, and as people who do understand human beings and human sufferings, and we're in the game of looking after people, we really did not really see a reason for us to wait until we're dealing with the problem at the other end.
Okay, so you felt there wasn't enough leadership?
Well, it's not only that, and in fact, for a long time, we felt that the leadership within the Muslim community is far from conclusively representing the community, and that's particularly the AFIC group.
Gentleman here, yes.
The problem is not with the leadership. Anyway, this is the problem with participatory democracy, because the participatory democracy is a democracy where the people want to come ahead and do something. But the problem is, even if the leadership condemned something while the state terrorism continues, and the people still butchered in Iraq, in Palestine, in Afghanistan, everywhere. Nobody will listen to this leadership anyway. So the leadership must the problem is to address the causes of the terrorism, which is why Australia, Spain, USA was only targeted in the last few years. It's very clear because of the extreme governments in USA, in Australia, and Britain and Spain, which is continuing to the what was.
So you're saying that's what's driving the problem?
Any issue, like I came from a medical background. If we want to talk about medical issue, we must address the causes, and the causes is not because my fellow friend here is saying something or the other fellow friends saying something else. The causes of the issue is the injustice, the huge injustice for the last decades, which is inflicted on the Muslim around the world.
Okay, everyone wants to have a say. Jihad, quickly, yes.
Thanks. I just want to take that point a little bit further. I think we're moving away a little bit from it. My understanding is that there's about 300,000 Australian Muslims at the moment. Now, of that, it's only a very, very small minority that may express a particular view that seems to go against the grain of what the majority of people were talking about. And I'm not talking about a majority of 51%, I'm talking about a majority of over 90%. What I've got a concern about, sorry Jenny, what I've got a concern about is the fact that if we keep on creating these supposed divisions, then eventually some people may start to feel a bit disenfranchised. And some things where they used to think, look, this is not me, this doesn't appeal to me, I am Australian, then I'm concerned that we may start losing a few people who are a lot more, as I said, over 90% are moderate. They might start getting different opinions and so forth, and that is my concern. That's what I think we should really be addressing at the moment.
Gentleman up the back, yes.
Thank you, sir. Madam, may I say, just to go constructive discussion, I'd really like to say that there are so many Muslims out there who really want to integrate into this nation, and I don't think what we're saying today is not really being constructive. What I'd like to say, if you let me finish, please, is that just a message to the future of this nation, if we say that the future may be in Australian Muslims, just to all my fellow young Australian Muslims, please listen very carefully. Those who know me are not going to like what I'm going to say because I've said it so many times. But Robert Kennedy once said that it is from the numberless diverse acts of courage and belief that human history is shaped. Each time a person stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, they send forth a tiny ripple of hope. And crossing each other from a million different centres of energy and daring, those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. I hope that all the Muslims, all Australians, Muslims and non-Muslims, can wake up tomorrow morning and say that they want to build a society where they can get their their kids being brought up in a harmonious society. I call upon all Muslims to act upon what they believe in the Quran.
I think you've made your point. I think we've taken your point, and thank you for making it. Clive, you had your hand up before. I wonder what you wanted to say.
Well, I think that we can point to injustices being perpetrated in a number of places overseas, Palestine, Iraq, Chechnya, Kashmir and so on. But I think the real issue for us is to try and prevent that playing itself out in Australia. And I thought I didn't really agree with the summit that was held, because I felt that what we really needed to do, we were not addressing the right people, because I'm not sure that many of those people actually do represent their constituencies. What I would have liked to have seen instead is a summit of young people, not just Muslims, but young people who could address the issues and see where we go forward in Australia.
Person up the back here, yes.
I just wanted to say, in terms of the leaders, the Muslim leaders out there that do get up and say what they want to say, like Khalid Yasin, I just feel that at this point in time, yeah, our religion tells us not to, back away from what is the truth and everything, but I guess they've got to understand that, not just Muslims are listening to the lectures that are being given. So just make sure what you say is very clear and concise, and don't leave it up and open for people to just take sound bites and misunderstand it.
Yes, lady over there.
If I may, 2 points in particular. Number one, this whole issue of a representative or one voice. I find this whole discussion really is quite ridiculous when you're looking at such a large number and such a large community. I mean, if we're going to look at representatives and people that are going to take the community that they reflect and say, I'm going to actually do what they're asking me to do. I mean, I'd like to ask a very simple question. When John Howard decided to send the troops off to Iraq, we had a rally here of over 1 million people who protested against this. Okay? Now, I don't believe that their voices were being heard. Now, in regards to more people giving lectures and this matter, I think what we must address, and I think you as any other journalist well know, Jenny, that many people can give lectures and many people can give talks, but what goes to air is not dictated by the Muslim community. It is dictated by those who are in ownership of the media outlets.
But I must make the point too, and look, I think the criticisms of the media are very fair, actually. A lot of the criticism of the media is very fair on this issue. But at the same time, I also know from talking to Muslims, a lot of Muslims in the preparation of this program, there was a lot of criticism of the leadership of people like you, Amjad, because people were saying that you hadn't stood up quickly enough, strongly enough, that organisations like the Federation of Islamic Councils should be doing more. It should be out there more. It should be putting its message out more often. Now, how do you respond to those comments? Because they were widespread comments we had from quite a lot of people we spoke to.
Well, Jenny, I don't say that the EFIC is a perfect organisation. We are part of the community that we represent. But I believe people know from the fact that we haven't had any attacks on Muslims in the aftermath of the London bombing, for instance, was evidence of the fact that some of the things that the Muslim community as a whole, and I don't claim that AFIC was alone in doing that, had done the kind of programs that we had conducted in the media and outside of the media, that it did bring those kind of results. And I think we have a long way to go. Certainly, there are problems. It's a diverse community. But I think a lot of Muslims also don't know what AFIC has done. Now, these are some of the weaknesses that we have.
Waleed, what do you think about this whole question of leadership?
I think that the thing that has been stated so far that is incredibly true is that the Australian Muslim community is so diverse that the idea of having it represented so that the thoughts of 400,000 people are funneled through the mouth of one person, I mean, that's just absurd.
But I don't think that's the criticism, to be fair. I mean, the criticism I've heard is hasn't been strong enough. You know, it doesn't matter how many voices.
Yeah,
I mean, you could have 10 different voices being strong in condemning violence, absolutely outright.
What I'm getting
but
to-
the sense that it hasn't been strong enough.
There have been lots of condemnation of that. And can I just say that at AFIC level, we did, in the aftermath of September 11th, we trained a whole range of people throughout Australia in dealing with the media. In managing the media, for instance. And I think they did an excellent job, and I can name some of those people.
Yes.
Now, I think...
Sorry, I'm trying.
We're diverting a lot into the leadership. Well, the leadership of the Australian Muslims is no good. I can tell you that now, and especially AFIC.
Is no good, you're saying?
It's no damn good.
Why is it no good? Why is it no good?
AFIC works on dividing the community rather than solidifying. And I challenge anybody that say that AFIC worked for the youth, which is the future generation of Australia. But...
All the women you say...
Can I come to another point here?
Well, just before you...
Please let me finish.
Go ahead.
Now, we're diverting from the actual issue. We're blaming the community for something we haven't done. Every time something happens in the world, the Muslim communities suffer. We have no authority to send the troops to Iraq. We have no authority to send the troops to Afghanistan. We have no authority to condemn the Palestinian rather than condemning the Palestinian and the Israeli every time something happens. So there is a bias. And there is troops in Afghanistan, there is a troop of Iraq. The government can jump up and down and say it's not the reason for terrorism. We have to go to the grassroots and treat it so we can get rid of terrorism.
Gentleman up here has had his hand up for ages. Yes.
So you need an explanation saying we condemn terrorism. We don't need to give one. It says in the Quran, if you take one innocent life, it's like taking all of mankind. If you save one innocent life, it's like saving all of mankind. You don't need Muslims sitting on a stage saying, we condemn killing, we condemn terror. You don't need that. When there was an epidemic of the Catholic priest pedophilia, Muslims didn't ask the Catholic priest, can you condemn pedophilia? We know what's wrong.
Gentleman over there, yes.
Look, I think is what Australians, as an ordinary Australian listening to all this, and it just strikes me, is that you're so hung up on what's happening in Iraq and Lebanon and over here and blaming governments there, and ordinary Australians just want to hear from you that you want to be here, that you want to...
Wait a minute, let him finish.
That you want to share in our future together, and that you want to do it in a way that that we know that we're, just as you are afraid of walking down the street, we're afraid walking down the street from you. And we want to know that we can let down our barrier and build a bridge to you, and that you're going to want to come across.
The Muslim youth are open to discussions, we're open to forums, but the thing is, because of the government, I guess, sort of...
Let's not blame the government for people.
Listen, when
okay, one at a time,
when they say something like, Muslim, women with the scarves issue, right? That makes Muslims feel that we're being alienated and left as a single group, and we cannot come to an Australian like my manager. We discuss things where he understands from me and he gets my point of view, I get his point of view. That's what we'd like to see happening.
Okay.
Have any more different backgrounds?
Okay, just a couple of people who we haven't heard from. There are a couple of people with their hands up over here. Yes.
Yes. Crime is crime, Jenny. Never mind who's doing that crime. A criminal is a criminal. What happened in before 5-6 years in Oklahoma? The guy killed 200 people. He was a criminal and he was a Christian. How Hitler is done? He's burned the Jew there. He was also criminal. What is another I don't naming? The people they done in New York or London or in Bali or here there. They done also in Spain or in Sharm el-Sheikh. That's the crime. Those people, just listen to me. Those people they done. This is a crime. We condemning a crime, and these kind of people they are criminal.
Okay.
We don't agree.
And I guess the bottom line...
Just a minute. We are not... We as a Muslim, beside our differences, this another things, we as a Muslim, 99.99, we condemning all crime, all criminal. Those people they're doing...
Okay, you've made your point. Irfan, yes.
The problem is that the views of the overwhelming majority of Australians, including Muslims, because this is a community that's been in Australia since the 1830s, remember, this is not a migrant community we're talking about. These people, their views are not being articulated by the leadership, because the leadership is dominated by people with a migrant mentality. And what I mean by that is it's dominated by people who don't really have roots in Australia, who are prepared to say things where it's okay for them, if things go bad, they can go back to Delhi or Bar or wherever. But where am I going to go? East Ryde? I mean, it's really crazy. So because of that, our views aren't reflected.
Well, okay, the bottom line, I think, for people, the bottom line for people watching this, one of the things that they want to try and get a grip on is whether there are people in Australia who are capable of carrying out suicide bombings. That's what people are frightened of. And I wonder what people here think about that, whether they think that's... Waleed, what do you think is the answer to that question?
Are there people here that could do it?
Yeah, that are capable of doing it, or that are motivated to do it, I suppose.
I'm not a security or intelligence official. You'd probably have to ask them. I mean, they'd know more than me. But what frustrates me about this whole discussion is that it's a polarised discussion on the one hand about, it's all about foreign policy, and on the other hand, it's all about ideology, especially in the public conversation. Consistently, Western government lines has been terrorism is purely about it's an ideological phenomenon. You think this way, you go do that. I think both propositions that explain very complex human behaviour through a one-dimensional narrative, both propositions are equally absurd. What we're not doing is actually engaging with the human complexities that go into making someone who may have a particular ideological bent, sure, but there's a difference between having that ideological bent and actually strapping a bomb to yourself and doing it. It's far more complex than just reducing it to a discussion.
It's a very important point, I think, that you make, actually, that the difference between doing something and having a particular ideological position. I think that often gets mixed up.
As long as we talk about good and evil, we will actually never get anywhere.
Okay, Philip Ruddock, what do you think about that? What do you think about this idea that there's a difference between people expressing political views, passionately expressing political views, that might involve violence, that they might involve references to violence, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to go and commit an act of terror?
Well, it's a question of what is said and the context and how people, perhaps even with diminished capacity, might react to those comments and observations. And if somebody is encouraging people to go out and deliberately take the life of an innocent person, you have to ask yourself whether that conduct, which might lead to such an act is something you need to deal with.
And you clearly think you clearly think at the moment there's a need for tougher laws. That's what you're foreshadowing.
Look, the point I would make is that Sheikh Khan made it very clearly. I am concerned to deal with terrorism, extremism. I have a very strong view that it cannot be confined to any one particular community or any one religion. I don't believe there is any justification, however it is put in political terms, for targeting deliberately innocent women and children to try and achieve a political objective.
That is an absolute figure of hypocrisy.
Well, no, it's and when you have people, when you put that proposition, who then argue that there is a justification for that sort of behaviour, you can see why I have some difficulty with it.
Mr. Ruddock rationalised earlier the death of 500,000 children in Iraq. And if he's saying we can't rationalise acts of terrorism, the reality is the Australian government, with its allies of the US and Europe, have inflicted the worst sort of terrorism that has been known to mankind. Now, he's rationalising that by justifying it of an ulterior
Neil James, you want tougher laws too. Why do you want tougher laws?
Well, I think part of the problem tonight has been the debate, perhaps naturally enough, because it's been a debate very much so far among the Muslim community, has contextualised the problem as just applying to Muslims. If you look at this in the wider sense, Australia's a pretty tolerant society. I mean, Islamist extremists murdered 88 Australians in Bali, and most Muslim Australians copped no flack about it, as an example, over 2 years ago.
They did.
Well,
no, that's not correct.
They certainly didn't cop as much flack as 88 dead Australians in Bali.
Well, they didn't die, but they did cop a lot.
Okay, can we just finish on it, because we are running out of time. Can we just finish on this question?
There's a simple point here, and that is Australian society as a whole, and this is one of the disadvantages the Muslim community face. Australian society as a whole lacks so much religious belief and understanding that the average Aussie can no longer tell the difference between a mainstream believer of any religion and a bigot. And that's half the problem, because the vast majority of Muslim Australians are mainstream believers who aren't a problem at all. The gentleman over here, for instance, is a bigot.
Okay, can we get back to this question of what you want to happen? Because I know that you want to see much tougher laws.
The law has to face up to this problem. Now, our sedition and our treason laws have to be tightened up to some extent, because we face the same problem we faced when we had to fight extremism from communists or Nazis or Irish separatists. It's not a new problem. You have to take the long view and look at this calmly. We faced this problem before, and we'll face it down before.
Julian, I want to comment back from you on this, because I know you think the political response to the climate, the political climate at the moment has been disastrous. Why?
It has taken centuries to get the democratic freedoms which characterise our society. No erosion of democratic freedoms should be allowed unless it is fully and plainly justified. Now, the threat of terrorism in Australia, I think, is real but minor. The actual consequences of terrorism worldwide, although terrible, are minor. When you consider it, worldwide, I think terrorism has killed a couple of thousand people in the last couple of years. Typically, the figures run at less than 1,000 deaths a year. Each one of those deaths is tragic. The war on terror has cost $400 billion American dollars. Wouldn't that money have been better spent by fighting the war against AIDS, or against poverty, or against childhood death?
Jenny. Senior Constable Ali, Gurdag, I wonder what you think about this, because I know that you're a liaison officer in the community with the police in Victoria. Now, what do you think about this idea of do tougher laws work? I mean, is that a way of dealing with some of the issues that we've been talking about?
Jenny, I can just like to say this. I'm not an expert with regards to law reformation, so I suppose we've got the relevant parties here to comment on that. What I can say, though, is with regards to addressing issues which impact the broader society, education is the most important way of addressing this particular issue, and we've demonstrated that through Victoria Police, for example, through the Multicultural Liaison Unit, where we have established very strong links with members of the Muslim community, for example, and that gives them an opportunity to I suppose, view their concerns, their issues, as well as what our concerns are, and we work together collectively collectively to address this particular issue, and how opportune it is for me as a Muslim, just listening to a lot of the comments being made here today, how opportune it is for me and how grateful I am, the fact that I've been born in Australia, the fact that I am a Muslim, yet I'm taking on a leadership role by, I suppose, getting across a very powerful message, a very positive message to all members of the community about how we can all contribute, what the obligations of a Muslim is, how we can all contribute to the broader society for the betterment of society.
We are nearly out of time. Adam, I know you've got a couple of proposals. I mean, what do you think about suggestions of deportation and banning and those sorts of things? I mean, would you like to see some people out of the country?
Look, that's the thing. Where do they go? I mean, why? I was born in Turkey, for example. Why should, if I sort of turn into a extremist or whatever we call it? I mean, we're talking about language here. Why should Turkey take me? That is one big issue. Can I just say, as far as education, that's the most frightening thing about London. The people that were involved in the bombings were. Well, on appearance, decent, upstanding, sort of middle-class-ish, well-educated and ostensibly well-adjusted individuals. That's why I say, how can you categorically say, how can you present a cogent argument to say that it won't happen in Australia?
Sister Aziza, can I just get a final comment from you? What have you made of what you've heard tonight? What is the message you're coming away with, and then the message you'd like to send out to the broader community?
I would like to send out this message that all Australians, Muslims and non-Muslims, should feel free to sympathise with victims of colonisation and war. But we should also remember that Islam and Christianity condemn the taking of civilian innocent life, and that more victims are Muslims that are falling every day in Iraq than maybe the forces of the coalition. Palestine is another issue altogether. They are fighting on their own land.
Okay, but in terms of just summarising your view now about the message you want to get out, I mean, that's a complicated message in a sense. What is the message you think that needs to be sent out?
The message is Australian Muslims are Australians. We care very deeply about the welfare of Australia, but we don't like to see Australians held under siege. We would like us to be treated as Australian citizens.
Jihad, final comment from you.
Sorry, thanks. I was just going to add a bit more to that. I thought the most important thing tonight is probably trying to show people that me as a Muslim, is just as Australian as the person that lives down the road as well. I mean, to that end, everything that they participate in, I participate in. And to answer the question of my learned friend who up there wanted to know whether, there was a threat. Look, there's no threat from me, and there's no threat from a lot of the people that I know, and that's the majority of Islam in Australia is a moderate place.
I think that's a very good note to end on, and I'd like to thank, we are out of time, I'm sorry, I'd like to thank everybody very much for taking part tonight. It's been really interesting. Thank you very much. And that is Insight for this week. I should point out that we also invited Sheikh Khalid from the Lakemba Mosque to join us tonight, but he was overseas and unavailable. You can keep talking on our website about this, www.sbs.com.au/insight. And you can join our audience here anytime if you log onto the web and follow the prompts. Tonight's Insight will be repeated on Friday at 1 p.m. I hope you'll join us same time next week. Until then, good night. Thank you very much. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, everybody.
School bullying has gone digital. Abuse